I think one of the times that really struck me in terms of things were really wrong was this, that I was around when Violence Against Women Act first passed in 1994. And I remember people organizing around that. At that time I was in San Francisco working at Asian Women's Shelter in the Asian community. So we had heard something, Violence Against Women Act was being worked on, was going to be passed, and that it actually would have some good, particularly good interventions for immigrant women. But what I came to find out was it was being passed as part of the crime bill. So on the one hand, I and other people I knew were really actively opposed to the crime bill. Like, we knew that was when Three Strikes You're Out was really just starting to come into the fore, and people were starting to promote that as a way to combat crime. And we were completely against that. We knew that it was going to bring the death penalty to even more people. And at the same time, VAWA was part of the crime bill. So I thought, something's really wrong here. There's a movement that I'm really passionate about, the anti-violence movement, is having this major piece of legislation passed as part of a piece of legislation that was extremely against. So when Violence Against Women Act passed in 1984, I remember being in a room and being told that we should, all applaud because VAWA was passed. And I just had a really hard time doing that because we knew that it got passed as part of the crime bill. That means that passed as well. Why is it that we were so tied in with the criminal justice system? Why is it that it had gotten to the point where we wouldn't oppose something that it seemed to me that people in the movement would be opposed to? We were going out and marching against the war, but why wouldn't we march then against something like that was going to put more and more people in prisons, and that was going to actually strengthen the carceral system to even do more damage to communities of color and other marginalized communities, and communities just in general. The other story I wanted to tell in terms of coming up with the organization that I started in 2004, which is called Creative Interventions, we had formulated a critique of the anti-violence movement, which many of us had been part of and still are part of. I have to say for myself, I really thought there were a lot of alternatives out there. People actually didn't have concrete alternatives. They had a concrete critique, but the alternatives were not there in place. So that's where I became very interested in seeing what we who were really interested in this critique and who also had done intervention work could come up with in terms of some alternatives. So that was one of the things that got me committed to at least participating and coming up with alternative approaches. But another thing happened, which was that I had a really good friend, she's still a friend of mine, who I had found out was in a domestic violence situation. She didn't want to go to a shelter. She didn't feel comfortable calling the police. And at that time, I remember being, of course, extremely concerned, but also being so aware that even though I had all of these years of experience working on the issue of domestic violence, worked in a shelter, knew the whole network of services and interventions that were available, that I couldn't come up with a response that was appropriate. I mean, that to me was really astounding. I also had a relationship with her partner and felt that somehow I might have had a little leverage with this person, and thought that perhaps we had enough of a community that not only did I have leverage, but other people in the community would have leverage as well. I thought to myself, what would make this difference? I did not feel comfortable or safe doing something alone, and I did feel like something collective might work. And that's where I came up more concretely with the idea of creative interventions, which was I would want to have a space where I could just come with the situation, whether I was a survivor or a friend, that there would be a way for us to bounce off ideas, what might work, that we might actually bring together collective groups of people that might actually come up with a plan to go in and actively intervene and form some kind of a collective response that could at least increase our own personal safety, but also, come up with better ideas about how to do that, think about what might work, have the survivor engaged in that process, have the survivor not there if they didn't want to engage. And that's how I came up with some of the concrete ideas behind creative interventions and what kind of space that would be. I think that one of the important things that we need to change is to shift away from, or perhaps at least expand from, a direct services model to one that is collective, and that really sees that when people are in a violent situation, they don't turn to shelters first. The first responders are usually their friends, their family, community members, perhaps clergy. Those are the people that people first turn to. And why aren't we doing more to equip them with the knowledge and the skills to be able to intervene effectively? I think what we've done is we have considered communities to be a place of danger, the people that you should run away from, the people that are ignorant and just don't know that much. And I've really come to believe that, even though I've heard every kind of horror story about community members or families or friends saying the wrong thing, blaming, making people stay in situations that have been really dangerous, and I do think that some people are not well-meaning people. I think mostly they're people that don't know what else to do, and they actually think that that's the best strategy. So why can't we do more education with family members and community members, not something to be able to identify domestic violence or sexual assault, let's say, which I think we've done a pretty good job of doing, but to actually get them to have the capacity and the skills to do something about it.